The crimson stain spread beneath Virginia Lawson's feet as she crouched on the dusty wooden floorboards, frantically pressing a damp cloth to her father's chest. Her tears blurred the gruesome scene before her, but couldn't wash away the reality her father was dying and with him any hope for her future. "Run, Rose," he whispered, blood bubbling at his lips. "They're coming for the land. They'll take everything." "I won't leave you, Pa," Rose Lawson sobbed, her auburn hair falling across her face as she leaned closer. "You must," he insisted, his voice growing weaker. "They'll show no mercy." The door splintered open behind her, and heavy boots thundered into their modest farmhouse. Rose whirled, still clutching the blood-stained cloth, to find 3 men filling the doorway. The tallest one, with a thick mustache and cold eyes, stepped forward. "Well now, looks like we're too late for negotiating." He nudged her father's boot with his own, then turned to Rose. "Edgar Lawson signed papers with the bank months ago. This land belongs to the Western Pacific Railroad now." "He never signed anything," Rose protested, rising slowly to her feet. At 22, she had seen hardship, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. "You're lying." The man's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "Doesn't matter what you believe, miss. What matters is what the law says. And the law says all this," he gestured broadly, "is ours now, including any chattels and property." "My father just died," Rose said, her voice breaking. "At least allow me to bury him properly." "You'll have until sundown," the man declared, releasing her arm with a push that sent her stumbling. "After that, everything on this property gets sold at auction to cover your father's debts. Everything." It was May 1875, and in Sacramento County, California, a woman alone had few protections under the law. As Rose stood on the porch later that afternoon, watching her father's simple pine coffin being lowered into the ground by the hired gravediggers, she knew her options were dwindling by the minute. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she made her way back to the farmhouse. Inside, men were already cataloging every item: her mother's cherished china teacups, the rocking chair where her father had told stories on winter evenings, even the family Bible with generations of names carefully recorded inside. "Madam, you'll need to gather only what you can carry," said a thin clerk with spectacles perched on his nose. "Everything else is listed for auction." "But these are family heirlooms," Rose protested. "My mother's wedding ring, my grandmother's quilt, all assets to cover debts," the clerk said without looking up from his ledger. "You might consider yourself fortunate. Some in your position would have been thrown out immediately." Rose felt her cheeks burn with anger and humiliation. "Fortunate? My father was murdered by railroad men who wanted our land." The clerk finally looked up, his expression neutral. "The official report says he suffered a heart episode, tragic but natural causes." "He was shot," Rose exclaimed. "Miss Lawson," the clerk said quietly, "I suggest you accept your circumstances and prepare yourself. The auction begins at 9 tomorrow morning." That night, Rose packed the few possessions they'd allow her to take: a change of clothes, a small portrait of her parents, and the silver locket her mother had given her before succumbing to fever 3 winters ago. She tried to sleep but found herself staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with desperate plans that all led nowhere. Morning arrived with the sound of wagons and voices. Peering through the curtains, Rose saw townspeople gathering, some looking uncomfortable, others eagerly eyeing the farmhouse. The auctioneer was setting up his stand on the front lawn, and railroad officials stood nearby, smoking cigars. A knock came at her bedroom door. "Time to come out, Miss Lawson." With shaking hands, Rose gathered her small bundle and opened the door. 2 men escorted her to the front porch, where the auctioneer was already addressing the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, by order of the Western Pacific Railroad and Sacramento County Bank, we commence the liquidation of the Lawson estate. All items will be sold to satisfy outstanding debts, beginning with farm equipment and household furnishings." Rose stood to the side, forcing herself to watch as her entire life was dismantled piece by piece. Her father's tools, her mother's kitchen utensils, the harvest from their fields all sold for a fraction of their worth. As noon approached, the crowd thinned, most of the valuable items already claimed. Rose felt a momentary relief that her ordeal was ending until the auctioneer's next words froze her blood. Now, for our final lot labor contract for one Rose Lawson, age 22, in good health. Starting bid to cover remaining debt of $200. Contract term of 1 year. What? Rose gasped, stepping forward. You cannot sell me, I am a free woman. The railroad official who had been in her home yesterday stepped forward. Miss Lawson, your father used you as collateral on his final loan. Your labor is legally bound to whoever purchases the contract. That's impossible. Rose's voice rose with panic. I never agreed to any such thing. Your agreement wasn't required, he replied coldly. Now step back and let the auction proceed. Rose felt the ground sway beneath her feet as bidding began. This couldn't be happening, not in America, not in 1875. But as the bids rose, the horrible reality settled over her. She was being sold along with the family chattels, her freedom auctioned away to the highest bidder. The bidding slowed at $230, offered by Mr. Hargrove, who owned the saloon in town, a man known for his wandering hands and cruel treatment of his workers. Rose felt sick at the thought of being his property for a year. Going once, the auctioneer called. Rose closed her eyes, silently praying for deliverance. $250, called a new voice, deep and steady. Rose's eyes snapped open. At the edge of the crowd stood a tall man she'd never seen before. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and his face was partially shadowed by the brim of his hat. But she could see he was younger than most of the bidders, perhaps 30, with broad shoulders and a determined set to his jaw. $250 from the gentleman in the back, the auctioneer announced. Do I hear more? Mr. Hargrove turned, scowling at the newcomer. $275, he countered. $300, the stranger replied without hesitation. The crowd murmured. This was far more than the debt required. Hargrove hesitated, then shook his head and stepped back. $300 going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the back. Rose felt her legs go weak as the stranger approached, paying the auctioneer with crisp bills from a leather wallet. He signed the paper, thrust at him, then turned toward her. She could see his face clearly now, tanned from the sun, with startling blue eyes that regarded her not with ownership, but with something else she couldn't identify. Miss Lawson, the railroad official said, this is the contract transferring your labor to, he glanced at the paper, Mr. Preston York for the period of 1 year. Preston York tipped his hat slightly. Miss Lawson, he said, his voice carrying only to her ears, gather your things. We're leaving. Numbly, Rose collected her small bundle. The crowd had begun to disperse, most avoiding looking at her directly. The shame of being sold like furniture burned in her chest as she followed Mr. York to where his horse was tethered beside a small wagon. I suppose I should thank you for outbidding Mr. Hargrove, she said stiffly when they reached his horse. York studied her for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and withdrew the contract. Without a word, he tore it in half, then quarters, then eighths, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. Rose stared at him in disbelief. What are you doing? You are free, he said simply. Free with me or free to go wherever you choose. That contract was an abomination. But you paid $300, Rose stammered. I paid for your freedom, not for you, he replied. No person should own another. Tears filled Rose's eyes, but she blinked them away, suspicious. Why would you do this for a stranger? A shadow crossed York's face. Let's just say I've seen what happens when people are treated as property. He gestured to his wagon. I have a small ranch about 2 days' ride from here. You're welcome to stay there until you decide what you want to do next, or I can take you to Sacramento if you prefer. Rose hesitated. This man was a stranger, but he had just spent a small fortune to free her. And where else could she go with nothing but the clothes on her back? How do I know I can trust you? She asked plainly. A slight smile touched his lips. You don't. But I give you my word as a man who despises what just happened here, you will be a guest, not a servant, and certainly not property. Rose glanced back at the farmhouse that had been her home for all her 22 years. It belonged to the railroad now. Everything she'd known was gone. I'll go with you, she decided, at least until I can make other arrangements. Preston York nodded, helping her into the wagon. We'll stop in town for supplies, then head north before nightfall. I imagine you're eager to put this place behind you. As they pulled away, Rose didn't look back at the farm. She couldn't bear to see strangers walking through her home, sleeping in her bed, harvesting from fields her father had tended with such care. Instead, she looked ahead, watching the mysterious cowboy who had purchased her freedom. Who was Preston York, and why had he intervened? She had no answers yet, only questions and an uncertain future stretching before her. They reached town quickly, and York pulled the wagon up in front of the general store. "Is there anything you need?" he asked. "Clothing, personal items." Rose clutched her small bundle tighter. "I have nothing, no money I'm offering," he said quietly. "It's not charity, Miss Lawson, it's human decency." After a moment's hesitation, Rose nodded. "Thank you, I could use some basic necessities." Inside the store, the proprietor's wife, Mrs. Calloway, rushed forward when she saw Rose. "Oh, my dear, I heard what happened. It's absolutely dreadful. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Calloway," Rose said, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "This is Mr. York," she added, gesturing to the cowboy who had followed her in. "He's helping me?" Mrs. Calloway's eyebrows rose as she assessed the tall man. "I see. Well, what can I get for you today?" York stepped forward. "Miss Lawson needs clothing and personal necessities. She'll select what she requires." As Rose moved through the store, selecting the most practical items she could find, sturdy work dresses, undergarments, a warm shawl for the evenings, she was acutely aware of the whispers following her. Everyone knew what had happened at the auction. By nightfall, the story would have spread throughout the county. She returned to the counter with her modest selections. York had added supplies to their purchase: flour, coffee, salt pork, and other staples. He paid without comment, then carried their purchases to the wagon. "Are you ready to leave?" he asked as he secured the last package. Rose nodded, eager to escape the stares and whispers. As they pulled away from town, she finally allowed herself to relax slightly. "Mr. York," she said after they'd traveled in silence for several miles, "you never explained why you were at the auction." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I came to buy a plow, heard about an estate sale, and thought I might find some good tools." A muscle tightened in his jaw. "Didn't expect to find people selling people." "Neither did I," Rose said softly. "I knew they would take the farm, but I never imagined." "Your father's debts," Rose stiffened. "My father was an honest man. The railroad wanted our land, and when he refused to sell, they found other ways to take it." York glanced at her. "You're saying they killed him?" "I found him shot in our barn," Rose said, her voice breaking slightly. "But the doctors said it was his heart. No one would listen." York was quiet for a long moment. "The Western Pacific has been buying up land all through this valley. Some say they're not particular about their methods." "They murdered my father," Rose said firmly, "and then they tried to enslave his daughter." "You're safe now," York assured her, "and I'm sorry about your father." As the sun began to set, York guided the wagon off the main road and into a small clearing near a creek. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, jumping down. "Should reach the ranch by tomorrow evening." Rose watched as he efficiently set up camp, unsaddling his horse and starting a small fire. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to life outdoors. "Do you live alone on your ranch?" she asked as he prepared a simple meal of bacon and beans. York nodded. "Just me and about 60 head of cattle. And lady, of course." He gestured to his horse, a beautiful chestnut mare who was grazing nearby. "No family," a shadow passed over his features. "Not anymore." Something in his tone warned Rose not to press further. They ate in companionable silence as darkness settled around them. After the meal, York spread a bedroll near the fire. "You take this," he said. "I'll sleep over there, give you your privacy." Rose hesitated. "Mr. York, Preston," he corrected. "Preston," she amended. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did today." He shook his head. "Don't thank me for doing what any decent man should have done." He paused, then added, "Get some rest, Miss Lawson. We have a long ride tomorrow." "Rose," she offered. "Please call me Rose." He nodded once, then moved to the far side of the clearing with his saddle for a pillow. Rose settled onto the bedroll, exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the day. Despite her circumstances, she felt oddly safe with this quiet, principled stranger who had appeared from nowhere to rescue her. She fell asleep listening to the gentle sound of the creek and wondering what tomorrow would bring. Morning came with birdsong and the aroma of coffee brewing over a small fire. Rose opened her eyes to find Preston already up, tending to his horse and preparing for their journey. He handed her a tin cup of steaming coffee without comment, giving her space to gather herself. "Did you sleep well?" he asked after she'd taken a few sips. "Better than I expected," Rose admitted. "Thank you." They ate a quick breakfast of hardtack biscuits with honey, then packed up camp. As Rose climbed into the wagon, she noticed Preston checking his rifle before stowing it beneath the seat. "Are you expecting trouble?" she asked. "Always wise to be prepared," he replied. "These roads can be unpredictable." They traveled steadily through the morning, the landscape gradually changing as they moved north. The flat valley farmland gave way to gently rolling hills dotted with oak trees. Preston pointed out landmarks as they went: a distinctive rock formation, an old trapper's cabin, a stream where he said the fishing was good in spring. "How long have you had your ranch?" Rose asked as they stopped to water the horses at midday. Preston leaned against the wagon wheel. 5 years. Bought it from an old-timer who was moving to Oregon to live with his daughter. And before that, he took a long drink from his canteen before answering. "I was a drover, mostly. Moved cattle up from Texas to Kansas, sometimes all the way to Wyoming. Before that." He paused. "I fought in the war." Rose studied him. He would have been young during the Civil War, perhaps just a boy. "Which side?" she asked cautiously. "Union," he said shortly. "But I don't much care to talk about those days." Rose nodded in understanding. Many veterans kept their war experiences locked away. "My father fought too, came back with a limp and nightmares that never quite went away." Preston's expression softened slightly. "War leaves its mark on everyone it touches." He straightened up. "We should move on if we want to reach the ranch by nightfall." As they continued their journey, the wagon hit a deep rut, jolting them both. Rose grabbed the seat to steady herself and found her hand landing on Preston's. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Rose felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She quickly withdrew her hand, murmuring an apology. Preston cleared his throat. "Road gets rougher from here. We're entering my land now." Rose looked around with new interest. The landscape had grown more varied, with patches of pine forest interspersed with meadows. In the distance, she could see mountains rising blue against the horizon. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Pride flickered across Preston's face. "It's not much compared to some spreads, but it's mine." Every acre paid for with honest work. They crested a small hill, and suddenly Rose could see the ranch, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, nestled in a protected valley beside a small stream. Smoke rose from the chimney, which made Rose glance questioningly at Preston. "My neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, comes by once a week to tidy up and leave a hot meal," he explained. "She's probably left something for supper." As they approached, Rose noticed how well-maintained everything was. The cabin was simple but sturdy, with a covered porch and glass windows. The barn was freshly painted red, and the corral fences were solid. Preston pulled the wagon up to the cabin and jumped down, coming around to offer Rose his hand. She took it, acutely aware of its strength and warmth as he helped her down. "Welcome to Whispering Pines Ranch," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a wooden table and chairs nearby. A rocking chair sat beside the hearth, and bookshelves lined another wall. Through an open door, Rose glimpsed a bedroom with a neatly made bed. Everything was simple but well crafted and clean. "It's lovely," she said honestly. Preston looked pleased. "Mrs. Abernathy's left stew on the stove. Why don't you make yourself comfortable while I see to the horses?" Left alone, Rose explored the cabin more fully. The bookshelves held an eclectic collection: novels by Dickens and Twain, poetry collections, practical manuals on cattle raising and farming, even a well-worn Bible. On the mantelpiece stood a daguerreotype of a smiling young woman with a small boy on her lap. Rose studied it curiously, but replaced it quickly when she heard Preston's boots on the porch. They ate Mrs. Abernathy's venison stew at the table, and Rose found herself relaxing for the first time in days. Preston was a quiet dinner companion, but not uncomfortably so. He answered her questions about the ranch and asked a few of his own about her life before her father's death. "You'll stay in the bedroom," he said as they cleared the dishes. "I'll sleep out here by the fire." "I couldn't take your bed," Rose protested. "You're not taking it, I'm offering it," Preston insisted. "Besides, I often sleep out here when I'm up late reading." The practicality of their arrangement struck Rose suddenly. Here she was, alone with a man she barely knew, miles from the nearest neighbor, yet she felt no fear. "Mr. York Preston," she corrected herself. "I don't know what my plans will be. I have no family, very little money." "You have time to figure it out," he assured her. "You're welcome to stay here while you decide what's next." Rose nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I'll earn my keep. I'm a good cook, and I can help with chores around the ranch." "We'll sort all that out tomorrow," Preston said. "For now, you should rest. It's been a difficult few days for you." That night, as Rose lay in Preston's comfortable bed, she tried to make sense of the drastic turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she had been the daughter of a respected farmer. Then she became an orphan, nearly a slave, and now the guest of a mysterious rancher with kind eyes and a quiet manner. She drifted off to sleep with the sound of Preston moving quietly around the cabin, stoking the fire and settling in for the night. The following days established a routine that brought unexpected comfort to Rose. She woke early, preparing breakfast while Preston tended to the morning chores. After eating, they would work separately, Preston with his cattle or making repairs around the property, while Rose took over cooking and household tasks that had clearly been neglected by the once weekly attentions of Mrs. Abernathy. On the 4th day, Mrs. Abernathy herself arrived, a robust widow in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "So you're the young lady Preston's been harboring," she said bluntly after introductions. "Heard what happened at that auction. Disgraceful business." Rose flushed. "News travels fast." "Like wildfire," Mrs. Abernathy agreed, setting down her basket of fresh eggs and vegetables. "But don't you worry. Anyone with sense knows you were wronged, and Preston York's a good man, best neighbor I could ask for." "He seems to be," Rose agreed cautiously. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes softened. "Lost his wife and son to typhoid 5 years back, right before he bought this place. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's always there when you need him." She paused. "He doesn't speak of them much, but I thought you should know." Rose glanced at the daguerreotype on the mantel with new understanding. "Thank you for telling me." "Well," Mrs. Abernathy said briskly, "I'll leave these provisions and be on my way. Since you're here now, I expect you can manage the cooking and cleaning." "Of course," Rose assured her. "And thank you for looking after him all this time." After Mrs. Abernathy left, Rose found herself studying the photograph more closely. The woman had a kind face, her arm protectively around a boy of perhaps 3 years. Preston must have been devastated by their loss. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Rose gathered her courage. "Mrs. Abernathy told me about your family," she said softly. "I'm very sorry." Preston was silent for so long that Rose thought he might not respond. Finally, he said, "Sarah was a schoolteacher, smart as they come. Our boy Thomas had her eyes." His voice was steady but tight with controlled emotion. "They got sick while I was away delivering cattle by the time I got back. You don't have to tell me," Rose said gently. "It was a long time ago," Preston replied, but they both knew that grief didn't measure itself in years. After another moment of silence, he asked, "What about you?" "You mentioned your mother passed some years back," Rose nodded. "When I was 19. Fever took her in just 3 days. My father never really recovered from losing her. They were so in love even after 20 years of marriage." "You were lucky to see that kind of love," Preston observed. "It's rare." "It is," Rose agreed. "I always hope to find something similar someday." Their eyes met briefly in the fading light before Preston stood. "Getting chilly. We should head in." As days turned into weeks, Rose found herself settling into life at Whispering Pines Ranch with surprising ease. She expanded the kitchen garden, trading with Mrs. Abernathy for seeds and cuttings. She discovered Preston's shirts needed mending and set about putting his wardrobe in order. The cabin, while clean, lacked the small touches that made a house feel like a home, so she gathered wildflowers for the table and rearranged furniture to make better use of the space. For his part, Preston seemed both pleased and slightly bewildered by these changes. He would sometimes stop in the doorway, observing some new curtain or rearranged bookshelf with a thoughtful expression before offering a quiet word of appreciation. One morning in late June, Rose was hanging laundry when Preston rode up on Lady, leading another horse, a gentle-looking gray mare. "I thought you might like to ride out with me today," he said, somewhat awkwardly. "Show you more of the ranch." Rose wiped her hands on her apron, surprised and pleased by the invitation. "I'd like that very much, though I should warn you I'm not an experienced rider. Daisy here is gentle as they come," Preston assured her, "and we won't go far." After changing into her sturdiest dress, Rose allowed Preston to help her mount. His hands were firm at her waist, lifting her effortlessly into the saddle. For a moment, they were close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his blue eyes, could catch the scent of leather and pine that always seemed to surround him. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Hold the reins like this," he instructed, demonstrating. Daisy responds to the lightest touch. They rode at a leisurely pace, Preston pointing out the boundaries of his property, the best grazing pastures, and the creek that provided water year-round. Rose was struck by his deep knowledge of the land. He could identify every plant, knew which trees provided the best shade for cattle in summer heat, and had an intimate understanding of the seasonal changes that affected his livelihood. "You love it here," she observed as they stopped to rest in a meadow filled with wildflowers. Preston nodded, looking out over the rolling landscape. "Never expected to settle down like this. After Sarah and Thomas died, I thought I'd just keep moving. Driving cattle, taking whatever jobs came along." He absently stroked Lady's neck. "But then I saw this place and something clicked, felt like somewhere I could breathe again." Rose understood completely. Despite the circumstances that had brought her here, she too had found unexpected peace at Whispering Pines. "What about you?" Preston asked. "Where do you see yourself heading?" The question caught Rose off guard. She'd been so focused on adjusting to her new circumstances that she hadn't thought much beyond each day's immediate needs. "I don't know," she admitted. "Before my father died, I might have eventually married someone from town, raised a family on our farm." She twisted Daisy's reins in her fingers. "Now everything's changed. You could still have those things," Preston said carefully. "You're young, educated, capable." "Perhaps," Rose agreed, though the future still felt clouded with uncertainty. "For now, I'm grateful to have a safe place to stay while I figure it out." Preston's eyes held hers for a long moment. "You can stay as long as you need. I mean that." The sincerity in his voice warmed her, and Rose found herself smiling. "Thank you." As they rode back to the cabin, Rose realized something had shifted between them. What had begun as an arrangement born of necessity was evolving into something else, a friendship, yes, but perhaps with the potential for more. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. Preston York was unlike any man she'd known, principled and kind, but carrying deep wounds from his past. And her own life was still unsettled, her future uncertain. That evening, as Rose prepared supper, she caught Preston watching her from his chair by the fire, his expression thoughtful. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, and Rose felt a flutter of something new and delicate taking root in her heart. July brought scorching heat to the valley, making outdoor work challenging. Preston rose before dawn to tend to the most strenuous ranch chores, returning mid-morning when the sun grew too intense. Rose adjusted her schedule accordingly, doing laundry and gardening in the early morning hours, then retreating to the relative coolness of the cabin. One particularly hot afternoon, Preston returned from checking on a pregnant heifer, his shirt soaked with sweat, face flushed with heat. "You need to cool down before you collapse," Rose scolded gently, taking his hat and pressing a glass of well water into his hand. "I'm fine," he insisted, though he drank the water gratefully. "There's a creek not far from here, isn't there?" Rose suggested. "Why don't we go there for a while? It would do us both good to escape this heat." Preston hesitated, then nodded, swimming whole about half a mile downstream. Deep enough to cool off. They walked rather than rode, Preston carrying a bundle with towels and a small picnic Rose had hastily assembled. The creek ran cool and clear, widening into a natural pool beneath a cluster of cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. "I'll go around that bend," Rose said, gesturing downstream. "Give you privacy to swim." Preston nodded. "Call if you need anything." Rose found a secluded spot where the creek formed a smaller pool. After checking to ensure her privacy, she removed her dress and chemise, leaving only her thin undergarments. The water was blessedly cool against her skin as she waded in, sighing with relief as the heat of the day washed away. She floated on her back, watching clouds drift across the blue sky through the canopy of leaves. For the first time since her father's death, she felt truly at peace. The tragedy that had befallen her, the auction, the uncertainty of her future all seemed distant, at least for this moment. After swimming, Rose changed into her spare dress, leaving her hair loose to dry in the warm air. She made her way back to find Preston already dressed, his hair damp and darker than usual, almost brown instead of its usual sandy color. He'd spread a blanket beneath a tree and laid out their simple meal: bread, cheese, and early summer apples. "Feel better?" he asked as she joined him on the blanket. "Wonderfully better," Rose confirmed, biting into an apple. "We should do this more often." They ate in companionable silence, listening to birds and the gentle sound of the creek. Rose was acutely aware of Preston beside her, his long legs stretched out, his profile against the dappled sunlight. With his guard down, relaxed from the swim, he looked younger, the usual tension in his shoulders eased. "Tell me about Texas," Rose said suddenly. "You mentioned you drove cattle from there." Preston leaned back against the tree trunk. "Hot as Hades and twice as dusty," he said with a small smile. "But beautiful in its way. Sky goes on forever, makes a man feel small." "Is that where you grew up?" He nodded. "Small ranch outside San Antonio. My father raised horses mostly, taught me everything I know about animals." "Are your parents still there?" "No," Preston said, his voice softening. "Pa died when I was 16. Mother followed a few years later. That's when I started driving cattle, nothing left to keep me in one place." "Until you met Sarah," Rose guessed. "Until Sarah," he agreed. "Met her in Kansas after a drive. She was teaching in a little town called Ellsworth. Most educated woman I'd ever known." A fond smile touched his lips at the memory. "Couldn't believe it when she agreed to marry a dusty cowboy like me. She must have seen what I see," Rose said without thinking. "A good man with a kind heart." Preston looked at her with surprise, and Rose felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer day. "I should gather our things," she said quickly, standing. "It'll be time to start supper soon." As they walked back to the cabin, Rose silently chided herself for the impulsive comment. Preston had been nothing but respectful toward her, offering friendship and safety without expectation. The last thing she wanted was to make him uncomfortable with unwanted feelings. Yet as the days passed, Rose found those feelings growing stronger. She noticed small things about Preston that she'd missed before, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how gentle his big hands could be when tending to an injured animal, the thoughtful way he listened when she spoke, as if her words truly mattered. One evening in late July, a thunderstorm rolled across the valley. Rose stood on the porch, watching lightning illuminate the mountains in brief, spectacular flashes. Preston joined her, leaning against the railing. "Always loved storms," he commented, "powerful reminder of how small we are." "They frightened me as a child," Rose admitted. "My father would tell me the thunder was just angels moving furniture in heaven," Preston chuckled. "Creative explanation." "He was good at those," Rose said, smiling at the memory, then her expression sobered. "I miss him terribly. And I still can't accept how his death was dismissed, how those men just took everything he worked for." Preston was quiet for a moment before saying, "The railroad's expansion has made some men very rich and left others with nothing. It's an ugly business sometimes." "It's not just business when people die," Rose said bitterly. "No," Preston agreed. "It's not." Thunder crashed overhead and rain began to fall in earnest, forcing them inside. As Rose lit the lamps, she noticed Preston watching her with an odd expression. "What is it?" she asked. He seemed to hesitate before saying, "There's something I need to tell you about why I was at that auction." Rose set down the lamp, suddenly uneasy. "You said you were looking for tools." "That was part of it," Preston acknowledged. "But I also went because I'd heard rumors about Edgar Lawson's death, that it wasn't a heart attack." Rose stared at him. "You knew about my father?" Preston nodded, his expression grave. "I've been watching the Western Pacific's land acquisitions for some time. Your father wasn't the first to die under suspicious circumstances after refusing to sell." "Why would you be tracking this?" Rose asked, confusion giving way to suspicion. Preston sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My brother was a railroad surveyor. 2 years ago, he discovered evidence that Western Pacific officials were falsifying documents, using intimidation to acquire land. He was going to report it." He paused. "They found his body in a ravine, called it an accident." Understanding dawned on Rose. "You've been investigating his death." "And others like it," Preston confirmed. "When I heard about your father, I went to the auction hoping to learn more I never expected. To find a woman being sold," Rose finished for him. "I couldn't let it happen," he said simply. "Not only because of what I was investigating, but because it was wrong." Rose sank into a chair, processing this revelation. "So taking me in, was that part of your investigation too?" "No," Preston said firmly, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. "That was about doing what was right. Everything I told you about staying here, about being welcome, was true." Rose searched his face, looking for deception but finding only sincerity and something more, something that made her heart beat faster. "I believe you," she said finally. "And I want to help. If the same people who killed your brother murdered my father, I deserve to be part of bringing them to justice." Preston shook his head. "It's dangerous, Rose. These men don't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens them." "They've already taken everything from me," Rose countered. "What more can they do?" Their eyes locked in silent communication, the storm raging outside matching the intensity of the moment. Finally, Preston nodded. "All right, I'll show you what I've gathered so far." He retrieved a wooden box from beneath a floorboard under his bed, a hiding place Rose had never noticed. Inside were documents, newspaper clippings, and letters, all meticulously organized. "My brother, Matthew, sent me these before he died," Preston explained, showing her several maps with surveyor's notes. They show the original proposed route for the railroad and then how it mysteriously changed to cut through certain properties. "Properties that were acquired after their owners died or were forced out," Rose guessed. "Exactly. And in each case, the new routes benefited certain investors who had advanced knowledge of the changes." Preston spread out several documents. Land that was worth pennies suddenly became worth dollars once the railroad announced its plans. My father's farm, Rose realized. It bordered the existing tracks. They wanted to build a station and storage yards. Preston nodded. I've been collecting evidence, trying to find a federal marshal or judge who isn't in Western Pacific's pocket. It's been slow work. What can I do to help? Rose asked. For now, just knowing about this puts you at risk, Preston warned. But there's a land office clerk in Sacramento who's been providing information. I need to meet him next week. You could come with me, perhaps talk to people who knew your father, see if anyone witnessed anything unusual the day he died. Rose nodded resolutely. I'll do it. Thunder boomed directly overhead, making her jump. Preston's hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. We'll be careful, he promised. I won't let anything happen to you. Their eyes met, and in that moment the air between them seemed charged with more than just the storm. Preston's gaze dropped to her lips, then quickly away as he stood, withdrawing his hand. It's late, he said. We should get some rest. As Rose lay in bed that night, listening to the storm gradually move away across the valley, her mind raced with all she had learned. Preston wasn't simply the kind rancher who had rescued her, he was a man on a mission, seeking justice for his brother and others like her father. And despite her efforts to guard her heart, she was falling in love with him. The journey to Sacramento took a full day by wagon. They left at dawn, Preston driving while Rose sat beside him, her heart both heavy and hopeful as they approached the city where her life had changed so dramatically. We'll stay at the El Dorado Hotel, Preston told her as they neared the outskirts. It's respectable but not so fancy that we'll draw attention. What should I tell people about why I'm back? Rose asked. Everyone will know about the auction. Preston considered this. The truth, mostly. You're staying with a friend while sorting out your affairs. No need to mention our investigation. In the city, Rose was struck by how much had changed in the few months she'd been away. New buildings were going up, the streets seemed more crowded, and the constant rhythm of construction echoed through the air. The railroad brings growth, Preston observed, following her gaze. That's what makes it so powerful and so dangerous when corrupted. The El Dorado Hotel was a 3-story building of red brick with clean, simple rooms. Preston arranged for 2 adjoining chambers, ensuring Rose's comfort and reputation. My contact at the land office is a man named Henry Collins, Preston explained as they settled in. I'm meeting him tomorrow morning. In the afternoon, we could visit your old neighbors if you're ready for that. Rose nodded, though the thought of returning to the area near her former home filled her with apprehension. I'll be ready. That evening, they dined in the hotel restaurant, conscious of curious glances from other patrons. A young woman traveling with a man not her husband was notable enough, but Rose also recognized several faces from Sacramento people who had witnessed her humiliation at the auction. People are staring, she murmured to Preston. Let them, he replied calmly. We have nothing to hide. After dinner, they retired to their rooms. Rose found sleep elusive, her mind filled with memories of her father and their life before it all fell apart. Through the thin wall, she could hear Preston moving around, likely just as restless as she was. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. Preston left early for his meeting with Collins, while Rose ventured to a nearby dressmaker's shop where she had once been a customer. Mrs. Barnett, the proprietor, greeted her with surprise and genuine warmth. Rose Lawson. My dear, we've all been wondering what became of you after that dreadful business. Rose explained her situation in carefully edited terms, describing Preston simply as a kind rancher who had offered her shelter. Mrs. Barnett nodded approvingly. It's good you found a decent man to help you. That auction was the talk of the county. Most folks thought it was a disgrace, though some defended it as legal. She leaned closer. Is it true you suspect foul play in your father's death? Rose hesitated. Why do you ask? My husband's cousin works for the sheriff's office. Said your father had a bullet wound that the doctor mysteriously didn't include in his report. Said it was because certain influential people wanted the matter closed quickly. Rose's heart raced. Yes, my father was shot. I found him that way, but no one would listen. Mrs. Barnett glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. My husband's been saying for years that the railroad has half the officials in this county in their pocket, especially since that new land commissioner came in, Mr. Blackwell. Blackwell. The name wasn't familiar to Rose. James Blackwell arrived about 3 years ago from back east, very friendly with the Western Pacific directors. Mrs. Barnett shook her head. Suddenly land disputes always seem to resolve in the railroad's favor. Rose thanked Mrs. Barnett for the information and promised to visit again before leaving town. Outside, her mind worked furiously. This Blackwell could be a key figure in the corruption Preston was investigating. She was so preoccupied that she nearly collided with a well-dressed man on the boardwalk. "Excuse me, sir," she began, then froze as she recognized him, one of the railroad officials who had been at her home the day her father died. He studied her with narrowed eyes. "Miss Lawson, isn't it? I heard you'd left the area." Rose forced herself to remain calm. "I'm visiting briefly on personal business, Mr. Montgomery," he supplied. "Richard Montgomery, Western Pacific Land Acquisition Office." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Surprising to see you back in Sacramento after your unfortunate circumstances." "Yes, well, life continues," Rose said stiffly. Montgomery leaned slightly closer. "I would advise caution, Miss Lawson. Some matters are best left in the past, for everyone's benefit." Before Rose could respond, Montgomery tipped his hat and continued down the street, leaving her shaken by the thinly veiled threat. When Preston returned to the hotel, she immediately told him about both encounters. His expression darkened at the mention of Montgomery. "Richard Montgomery is one of the men my brother implicated in his notes," he said grimly. "He's dangerous, Rose. If he recognized you, we need to be even more careful." "What did you learn from Mr. Collins?" Rose asked. Preston removed several folded papers from inside his coat. "Land records for 6 properties, including your father's farm. All show the same pattern: original deeds altered, new documents filed with signatures that Collins believes were forged." He paused. "And he mentioned this man Blackwell that Mrs. Barnett told you about. Apparently, he arrived from Philadelphia with strong connections to both the railroad and state officials. Do you think he could be behind all this? He's certainly involved, but I doubt he's acting alone." Preston rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Collins says there's a meeting of Western Pacific investors tomorrow night at Blackwell's home outside the city. Very private, very exclusive." "How does that help us?" "It doesn't directly," Preston admitted, "but it confirms these men are working together. The more we know about their operations, the better chance we have of exposing them." They spent the afternoon visiting Rose's former neighbors, carefully asking questions about the day her father died. Most were sympathetic but knew little. One elderly farmer, however, recalled seeing strange men on Lawson property the day before Edgar's death. "Wasn't railroad men, least not dressed like it," he told them as they sat on his porch. "More like hired guns, mean-looking fellows, thought it odd at the time." By evening, Rose was emotionally exhausted from revisiting the painful memories. In their hotel dining room, she picked at her food, her appetite diminished by the day's revelations. "We've made progress," Preston assured her. "Collins will continue gathering evidence, and now we know about Blackwell's involvement." "It still feels like we're so far from justice," Rose said quietly. "These men have money, power, connections. What do we have? The truth," Preston said simply. "And sometimes that's enough if you can get it to the right people." After dinner, they walked in the hotel's small garden, enjoying the cooler evening air. In the privacy of the shadows, Preston took Rose's hand. "I know this has been difficult for you," he said softly. "Facing these memories, these people, you've shown remarkable courage." Rose looked up at him, her heart quickening at his proximity. "I couldn't have done it without you." Something shifted in Preston's expression, a softening, a decision made. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, over almost before it began. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. Rose reached up, her fingers tracing his jawline. "I've wanted you to." This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation. Preston's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as Rose wound her arms around his neck. The world seemed to narrow to just this moment, the warmth of his embrace, the tenderness of his lips against hers. When they finally parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to feel this way again," he whispered. "After Sarah, I thought that part of my life was over." "I understand," Rose said. "I was afraid to trust, to hope for anything after losing everything." "Whatever happens with our investigation," Preston said, "know that my feelings for you are real, entirely separate from any of this." Rose smiled up at him. "I know, and mine for you." They returned to their rooms reluctantly, both aware of the proprieties they needed to maintain in public. As Rose prepared for bed, a soft knock came at the connecting door. "Rose." Preston's voice was low. She opened the door to find him still fully dressed, his expression troubled. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about Montgomery recognizing you today," he said. "It worries me. These men don't hesitate to eliminate problems. You think I'm in danger. I think we both are," Preston admitted. "But you especially, now that they know you've returned. We should leave Sacramento tomorrow, continue our investigation from a safer distance." "But what about the evidence we're gathering?" "Collins will continue his work," Preston assured her. "And I have a friend at a newspaper in San Francisco who might be interested in the story if we can provide enough proof." Rose considered this. "All right, we'll leave tomorrow." Preston nodded, relieved. "Try to get some rest." He hesitated, then leaned in to kiss her lightly. "Good night, Rose." "Good night," she whispered, watching as he closed the door between their rooms. Despite her agreement to leave, Rose found herself troubled by the thought of retreating. They were making progress, uncovering connections. Leaving now felt like surrendering. An idea began to form in her mind, reckless perhaps, but potentially valuable. The investor meeting Preston had mentioned was tomorrow night at Blackwell's home. If someone could observe that meeting, overhear the discussions. Rose knew Preston would never agree to such a risky plan. But she had something the others didn't: personal knowledge of what these men had done, and perhaps the element of surprise. By morning, her decision was made. She would tell Preston she needed to visit Mrs. Barnett once more before leaving, then make her way to Blackwell's estate. It was dangerous, yes, but the chance to gather crucial evidence was worth the risk. At breakfast, she casually mentioned her desire to say goodbye to the dressmaker. "It will only take an hour," she assured Preston. "You could see Collins one last time while I do." Preston agreed readily enough, and they arranged to meet back at the hotel at noon to depart. As soon as they separated, Rose hired a carriage to take her not to Mrs. Barnett's shop, but to the outskirts of town where she had learned Blackwell's estate was located. The property was impressive, a large white house set back from the road, surrounded by manicured gardens. Rose asked the driver to let her off at a neighboring property, claiming to be visiting friends. Once the carriage departed, she made her way cautiously toward Blackwell's estate. The grounds were busy with staff preparing for the evening's gathering. Rose observed from the shelter of trees as tables were arranged, linens laid out, and flowers delivered. Servants moved in and out through a side entrance, focused on their tasks. Taking a deep breath, Rose straightened her dress and walked confidently toward that same entrance, hoping to be mistaken for a newly hired helper. Her heart pounded as she approached, but she kept her expression neutral. Inside was a bustling kitchen where no one seemed to notice another young woman in a simple dress. Rose picked up a stack of napkins, following a maid who was distributing them in the dining room. From there, she moved through the house, always appearing purposeful while seeking a place where the meeting might occur. A large study at the rear of the house seemed the most likely location. Masculine furnishings, a substantial desk, and several chairs arranged in a semicircle. Most importantly, it connected to a small anteroom through a partially open door. Rose slipped inside this smaller room, finding it filled with bookshelves and a writing desk, perfect for concealment. Hours passed as Rose waited anxiously, listening to the house come alive with preparations. She knew Preston must be frantic by now, realizing she hadn't gone to the dressmaker's. Guilt gnawed at her, but she remained committed to her plan. As evening approached, Rose heard voices in the hallway. Peering through the crack in the door, she saw several well-dressed men entering the study. Montgomery was among them, along with others she recognized from the auction. A distinguished man with silver hair. Blackwell, she presumed, greeted each arrival. "Gentlemen, shall we begin?" Blackwell said once all were seated. "We have much to discuss before our other guests arrive for dinner." For the next hour, Rose listened intently as the men discussed railroad expansion plans, land acquisitions, and most damning of all, specific strategies for removing obstacles to their progress. "The Lawson situation was unfortunate," Montgomery remarked at one point. "Too public." "But ultimately successful," another man countered. "We have the land, the right-of-way is clear, and construction begins next month." "Speaking of the Lawson matter," Montgomery said, "I saw the daughter in town yesterday. Apparently she's returned." Rose froze as Blackwell's voice sharpened. "Returned? With whom?" "Unknown," Montgomery replied. "But if she's asking questions about her father's death, it could be problematic." "Handle it," Blackwell ordered. "Quietly this time." "And what of this rancher Collins mentioned?" another voice asked. "The one collecting information." "York," Montgomery supplied. "Preston York, former cattle driver, now owns a small spread north of here. Brother was Matthew York." "The surveyor?" Blackwell asked sharply. "The one who had that unfortunate accident?" "The same. Apparently, the younger York has been pursuing his own investigation." Blackwell was silent for a moment. "Two problems that might resolve each other," he finally said. "Find York. If the Lawson girl is with him, all the better. Make it look like robbery gone wrong." Rose's blood ran cold. They were planning to murder Preston and her. She needed to warn him immediately. Carefully, she eased toward the window, hoping to slip out unnoticed. But as she moved, her skirt caught on the writing desk, sending a pen holder clattering to the floor. Conversation in the study instantly ceased. "What was that?" Blackwell demanded. "Check the anteroom," Montgomery ordered. Rose frantically tried to open the window, but it was painted shut. Footsteps approached the connecting door. With nowhere to hide, she grabbed a heavy paperweight from the desk and positioned herself behind the door. It swung open, and a man stepped in. Rose brought the paperweight down on his head with all her strength. He crumpled with a groan, but the commotion brought others rushing in. "It's the Lawson girl," Montgomery exclaimed, reaching for her. Rose swung the paperweight again, missing Montgomery but striking another man's shoulder. She pushed past them into the study, making for the hallway door. Blackwell moved to intercept her, but Rose feinted left, then darted right, slipping past him. She raced through the house, knocking over a serving girl carrying a tray of glasses. The crash and commotion gave her precious seconds as she sprinted for the side entrance. Behind her, men shouted orders and footsteps pounded in pursuit. Outside, dusk had fallen. Rose ran toward the road, her lungs burning, her only thought to reach town and warn Preston. She had nearly reached the property boundary when a mounted figure appeared ahead of her. "Rose!" Preston's voice sent a wave of relief through her. He urged his horse forward, reaching down to pull her up behind him in one smooth motion just as Montgomery and another man emerged from the house. "Hold on tight," Preston instructed, turning his horse and spurring it into a gallop as shouts rose behind them. Rose clung to his waist as they raced away, expecting to hear gunshots at any moment. But they reached the main road without pursuit, Preston pushing his horse hard until they were well away from Blackwell's estate. Finally, he slowed to a safer pace, turning onto a side trail that led into a wooded area. What were you thinking?" He demanded once they stopped, his voice tight with anger and fear. "I've been searching everywhere for you." Rose slid from the horse on shaking legs. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I thought I could learn something at Blackwell's meeting, and I did. They're planning to kill us both." Preston's expression shifted from anger to alarm. "Tell me everything." Rose quickly recounted what she'd overheard, watching Preston's face grow grimmer with each detail. "We need to leave immediately," he said when she finished. "Not just Sacramento, California entirely. These men have too much power here." "Run away," Rose protested. "After everything we've learned, that's letting them win. It's staying alive," Preston countered. "We can't fight them if we're dead." "But what about justice for your brother, for my father?" Preston took her hands in his. "Rose, listen to me. What you did today was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish. You've confirmed what we suspected, but you've also put yourself directly in their sights." His voice softened. "I can't lose you, not now." The fierce emotion in his words struck Rose deeply. "What do we do then?" "We take what evidence we have to federal authorities, not here, but in San Francisco. My friend at the newspaper can help arrange it." Preston squeezed her hands. "It's our best chance." Rose nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in his plan. "All right, San Francisco." They returned to the hotel only long enough to collect their belongings, then departed Sacramento under cover of darkness. Rather than taking the main road, Preston led them on side trails he knew from his cattle driving days, keeping a vigilant watch for pursuers. They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horses and catch brief moments of sleep. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Sacramento, but Preston remained cautious, avoiding towns and keeping to less traveled routes. "How did you know where to find me?" Rose asked as they paused to water the horses at a small stream. "I didn't at first," Preston admitted. "When you didn't return, I checked with Mrs. Barnett. She hadn't seen you. I was frantic, thinking Montgomery had found you." He ran a hand through his hair. "Then I remembered Collins mentioning Blackwell's gathering tonight. It seemed like something you might try to investigate." "I'm sorry I frightened you," Rose said softly. Preston's expression was serious. "Promise me you won't take risks like that again." "These men have killed before and won't hesitate to kill again." "I promise," Rose agreed, "but I'm not sorry for what I learned. Now we know for certain they murdered my father and your brother." Preston nodded grimly. "And they'll keep killing unless they're stopped." They continued their journey, spending that night in an abandoned line shack Preston knew from his travels. The accommodations were primitive, a single room with a dirt floor and crude fireplace, but it offered shelter and safety from prying eyes. As Rose spread their bedrolls near the small fire Preston had built, an awkward awareness grew between them. Since their kisses in the hotel garden, circumstances had allowed little opportunity for personal conversations. Now, alone in this isolated cabin, the feelings they'd acknowledged seemed to fill the small space. "You should take the better spot, near the fire," Preston said, his voice slightly gruff. Rose looked up at him, seeing the conflict in his eyes, desire tempered by respect and concern for her reputation. "Preston," she said quietly, "after everything that's happened today, I don't want to be alone tonight. Not like that," she added hastily, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Just near you." Preston's expression softened. He sat beside her on the bedroll, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "When I couldn't find you today," he said, his voice low, "I realized just how much you've come to mean to me, the thought of losing you." Rose placed her hand over his. "You didn't lose me. And you won't." He leaned forward, kissing her with gentle restraint that quickly deepened into something more urgent. Rose responded in kind, her arms encircling his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he murmured, "when you're safe and those men face justice, I want to build a life with you, Rose, if you'll have me." Rose's heart soared at his words. "Are you asking me to marry you, Preston York?" A smile touched his lips. Not very romantically, I'm afraid, in a dusty lined shack while we're running for our lives. He took her hands in his. But yes, I'm asking, I love you, Rose. I didn't expect to find love again, but there it is. Yes, Rose said simply, joy bubbling through her despite their circumstances. Yes, I'll marry you, I love you too. That night they slept side by side, Preston's arm protectively around Rose's waist, their futures entwined despite the danger still pursuing them. They reached San Francisco 2 days later, the city's fog shrouded streets offering welcome anonymity after their tense journey. Preston's newspaper contact, Daniel Harrington, provided them with temporary lodgings in a boarding house run by his widowed sister. Federal marshals are interested in your evidence, Harrington told them after hearing their story. Especially since it involves multiple counties and potentially crosses state lines, but they'll need more than hearsay. Collins in Sacramento has land documents, Preston explained. But contacting him could put him at risk. Harrington nodded thoughtfully. I have a colleague who could approach him discreetly. What about physical evidence of the murders? Rose and Preston exchanged glances. My father was buried quickly, Rose said. The doctor's report claimed heart failure, despite the bullet wound I saw. And my brother's death was ruled an accident, Preston added. But his journal, which disappeared after his death, would have contained evidence of the railroad's illegal activities. Do you think it might still exist somewhere? Harrington asked. Preston shook his head. They would have destroyed it immediately. Unless, Rose said slowly, they kept it as insurance against each other. At their questioning looks, she continued, men like Blackwell and Montgomery don't trust anyone completely. What if one of them kept Matthew's journal as leverage over the others? It's possible, Preston conceded, but how would we ever find it? Montgomery has a townhouse here in San Francisco, Harrington offered. He stays there when attending board meetings, and there's one scheduled for tomorrow. Rose straightened. If he's at a meeting, his house might be unattended except for servants. No, Preston said immediately, knowing where her thoughts were heading. Absolutely not. You promised no more risks. We need evidence, Rose insisted. Without it, it's our word against theirs and they're powerful men with connections. Harrington cleared his throat. She's right about needing evidence, York, but breaking into Montgomery's home would be dangerous and illegal. There might be another way, Preston said after a moment. Montgomery's clerk, Jenkins, was at that meeting at Blackwell's. He seemed uncomfortable with some of the discussions, less hardened than the others. You think he might help us? Rose asked. If approached carefully, Preston said. He has access to Montgomery's papers, possibly even his home if he delivers documents there. Harrington nodded approvingly. That's more promising. Less risky, more strategic. They spent the evening crafting a plan. Harrington would use his newspaper credentials to arrange a seemingly innocent interview with Jenkins about railroad expansion. During this meeting, Preston would approach him privately with what they knew, gauging his willingness to help. The following day, the plan proceeded as arranged. Harrington met Jenkins at a small cafe, engaging him in conversation about his work with the railroad. When Preston entered casually and sat at an adjacent table, Harrington made introductions as if they were mere acquaintances. As the interview concluded, Harrington excused himself briefly, giving Preston the opportunity to speak privately with Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins, Preston began quietly, I believe you know who I am. The clerk's nervous glance confirmed Preston's suspicion. Mr. York, I've heard your name mentioned. Then you know why I'm interested in certain documents that might be in Mr. Montgomery's possession. Specifically, a journal that belonged to my brother, Matthew York. Jenkins paled slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Preston countered. I also think you're not entirely comfortable with certain aspects of your employer's business practices, particularly those discussed at James Blackwell's home recently. Jenkins glanced around anxiously. I could lose my position or worse just for speaking with you. You could face federal charges for being an accessory to murder if the truth comes out without your cooperation, Preston pointed out. My brother, Edgar Lawson, others who stood in the way of the railroad's expansion. The clerk's hands trembled slightly. What do you want from me? Information, Preston said simply. And access to any documents Montgomery might have kept that belonged to my brother. Jenkins hesitated, conflict evident on his face. There is a journal, he finally admitted in a low voice. I've seen Montgomery refer to it when preparing certain legal documents. He keeps it in his study at his home here in the city. Preston leaned forward. We need that journal. I can't just take it, Jenkins protested. He would know immediately. No, but you could make a copy of key pages, Preston suggested, or leave a window unlocked one evening when you deliver papers to his home. Jenkins looked horrified at the suggestion. That would be aiding breaking and entering? That would be aiding justice, Preston corrected, for men who were murdered on the orders of your employer. The conflict on Jenkins' face deepened. Finally, he whispered, Montgomery will be at the opera tomorrow night with the other directors. I deliver documents to his home study every Friday afternoon, the small window in the study. It sometimes doesn't latch properly. Preston nodded, careful to keep his expression neutral. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. You're doing the right thing. I hope so, Jenkins murmured, for all our sakes. When Harrington returned, the conversation shifted to innocuous topics before they parted ways. Preston rejoined Rose, who was waiting at their boarding house. Jenkins confirmed Matthew's journal exists, Preston told her excitedly, and he's going to help us access it. That's wonderful. Rose exclaimed. When? Tomorrow night, Preston explained, outlining the plan. I'll go alone, no, Rose interrupted firmly. We do this together. I lost my father to these men. I deserve to be part of exposing them. Preston wanted to argue but recognized the determination in her eyes. All right, he conceded. But you follow my lead, and if anything seems wrong, we leave immediately. The following evening, they positioned themselves near Montgomery's elegant townhouse as dusk fell. From their vantage point, they observed Jenkins arrive, spend approximately 20 minutes inside, then depart looking nervous but resolute. Let's wait another hour, Preston suggested. Make sure Montgomery has left for the opera and the house has settled. When full darkness descended, they approached the rear of the house. As Jenkins had indicated, a small window in the study had been left unlatched. Preston eased it open, wincing at the slight creaking sound, then helped Rose through before following himself. Inside, the study was dimly lit by moonlight filtering through the curtains. Preston produced a small lantern, lighting it to reveal a well-appointed room with leather-bound books lining the walls and a massive desk dominating the center. Where would he keep it? Rose whispered, scanning the room. Something that valuable would be locked away, Preston reasoned, moving toward a cabinet behind the desk. While Preston examined the cabinet, Rose checked the desk drawers, finding most locked. The bottom drawer, however, slid open, revealing neatly arranged files. Preston, she called softly. Look at these. The files contained property deeds, many with annotations in the margins owner resistant, requires persuasion, arranged accident. Rose's hands trembled as she found a file labeled Lawson. Inside was a document with her father's signature, clearly forged, and notes about eliminating the obstacle and daughter as collateral. This proves they targeted my father specifically, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. And here's proof they murdered others, Preston added, indicating more files. But we still need Matthew's journal. They continued searching, growing increasingly anxious as minutes ticked by. Finally, Preston discovered a hidden compartment in the cabinet, revealed when he pressed on what appeared to be a decorative molding. Here it is, he breathed, withdrawing a leather-bound journal with Matthew York's name embossed on the cover. Rose hurried to his side as he flipped through the pages, finding detailed notes, maps, and most crucially, entries documenting conversations. Matthew had overheard conversations that explicitly discussed eliminating landowners who refused to sell. This name's names, Preston said, his voice tight with vindication. Blackwell, Montgomery, and 3 railroad directors, dates, locations, specific plans. We need to take all of this, Rose decided, gathering the files they'd found. The journal and these property records. Preston nodded, helping her collect the evidence. They had just finished when a sound from the hallway froze them, both the front door opening, voices approaching. "Quick, the window," Preston whispered, pushing the documents into Rose's hands and urging her toward their escape route. Rose climbed through, clutching their precious evidence. Preston was halfway through the window when the study door opened, revealing Montgomery with another man. Montgomery lunged forward as Preston scrambled through the window, barely evading his grasp. "Run!" Preston shouted to Rose as he dropped to the ground outside. They fled through the garden, Montgomery's shouts following them. As they reached the street, a gunshot cracked through the night, the bullet splintering wood near Preston's head. They ran through darkened streets, taking a convoluted route back to their boarding house. Only when they were safely inside their room did they allow themselves to breathe normally. "That was too close," Preston gasped, checking Rose for any signs of injury. "But we have what we need," she replied, indicating the documents they'd rescued. "Proof of everything, the murders, the land theft, all of it." They spent the night examining the evidence in detail, finding even more damning information than they'd initially realized. Matthew's journal not only documented the Western Pacific's illegal activities, but also implicated government officials who had accepted bribes to look the other way. At first light, Harrington arrived, his expression grave. "Montgomery's reported a break-in. The police are searching for suspects." "We have the evidence," Preston told him, displaying their findings. "More than enough to warrant federal intervention." Harrington examined the documents, his journalist's eyes widening at the scope of corruption revealed. "This is explosive, far bigger than I imagined." He looked up at them. "You can't stay in San Francisco. Montgomery will be searching everywhere." "Where should we go?" Rose asked. "I have a contact in the federal marshal's office in Oakland," Harrington explained. "I'll arrange for you to meet him there today. If this evidence is as compelling as it appears, they'll take immediate action." Within an hour, they were on a ferry crossing the bay to Oakland, the precious documents secured in a leather satchel that never left Preston's possession. Harrington had arranged for them to meet Marshal Thomas Donovan at a small office near the waterfront. Donovan, a weathered man with shrewd eyes and a direct manner, listened intently as Preston and Rose presented their evidence and told their stories. He examined the journal and property records with growing concern. "This is exactly what we've been trying to prove for months," he finally said, looking up at them. "We've had suspicions about the Western Pacific's land acquisitions, but nothing concrete enough to act upon. This changes everything." "What happens now?" Rose asked. "I need to telegraph my superiors in Washington," Donovan explained. "Then we'll need sworn statements from both of you." He paused. "And you'll need protection. Montgomery and his associates won't hesitate to silence you permanently if they can find you." "How long will all this take?" Preston inquired. "Gathering additional evidence, securing arrest warrants, perhaps a week, maybe 2, Donovan estimated. During that time, you'll need to stay somewhere safe, somewhere Montgomery wouldn't think to look." "We could return to my ranch," Preston suggested. "It's isolated and I know the terrain." Donovan shook his head. "Too obvious. They know about your property." He considered for a moment. "I have a better idea. My brother owns a fishing cabin on Tomales Bay north of here. Remote, accessible only by boat or a difficult trail. You'd be safe there while we prepare our case." Rose and Preston exchanged glances, then nodded in agreement. They provided Donovan with detailed statements, signing affidavits that formalized their testimony. By late afternoon, they were on their way north in a closed carriage provided by the marshal's office. The journey to Tomales Bay took them through rugged coastal terrain, far from the railroads and cities controlled by the Western Pacific. They arrived at dusk, meeting Donovan's brother John, who transported them by boat to the isolated cabin. Nobody will find you here, John assured them. I've stocked provisions for 2 weeks. Marshal Donovan will send word when it's safe for you to return. Left alone in the simple cabin with its spectacular view of the bay, Rose and Preston finally allowed themselves to relax slightly. It's almost over, Rose said, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. Soon everyone will know the truth about what happened to your brother and my father. Preston stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. And then we can begin our life together, he murmured, kissing her temple. No more looking over our shoulders, no more running. Do you think we'll be able to return to your ranch? Rose asked, leaning back against him. I hope so, Preston replied. It's a good place to build a future, to raise a family. Rose turned in his arms, her heart full at the thought of that future. I'd like that very much. Preston's kiss was tender, a promise of the life awaiting them once justice had been served. The days at the cabin passed peacefully, a stark contrast to the tension and danger that had defined their relationship until now. They took walks along the shore, fished in the bay, and in the evenings discussed their hopes for the future. Without the immediate threat of danger, they discovered new dimensions to their feelings for each other, not just the intense connection forged in crisis, but the deeper compatibility of shared values and complementary temperaments. On their 10th day at the cabin, a boat approached from across the bay. Preston positioned himself at the window with his rifle but relaxed when he recognized John Donovan at the helm. Good news, John called as he secured the boat at the small dock. The marshal sent me to bring you back. Arrests have been made. All of them? Preston asked eagerly as they gathered on the shore. Blackwell, Montgomery, and 3 railroad directors, John confirmed. Plus 2 corrupt officials from the land office. Federal agents raided their offices and homes yesterday, found even more evidence. It's being called the biggest corruption case in California history. Relief washed over Rose. And they'll be tried, held accountable for the murders. The marshal says they're facing charges for everything from fraud to conspiracy to murder, John assured her. With your evidence and testimony, they don't stand much chance of escaping justice. They returned to Oakland that afternoon, meeting with Marshal Donovan to learn the full details of the case that was rapidly becoming a national scandal. Newspapers across the country were reporting on the Western Pacific corruption, with particular attention to the human cost the murdered landowners like Edgar Lawson and Matthew York. You'll still need to testify at the trial, Donovan explained, but that won't be for several months. In the meantime, you're free to return to your normal lives. The threat has been neutralized. What about my father's farm? Rose asked, and the other properties they seized illegally? The courts will sort that out, Donovan replied. But given the circumstances, I'd say there's a good chance you'll recover your family's land, or at least receive fair compensation for it. That evening, Rose and Preston checked into a respectable hotel in Oakland, finally able to make plans without the shadow of danger hanging over them. I was thinking, Preston said as they sat in the hotel's dining room, there's no reason to wait any longer. We could be married here before returning to the ranch. Rose's heart leapt at the suggestion. I'd like that, she said softly, very much. 2 days later, in a simple ceremony at a small church, with Harrington and Marshal Donovan as witnesses, Rose Lawson became Rose York. The minister, touched by their story which had been featured in the local newspaper, refused payment for his services, calling it an honor to unite 2 people who stood for justice at great personal risk. As they exchanged vows, Rose thought of how far she had come from that terrible day at the auction when she had been sold along with her family's chattels. Preston had not only purchased her freedom, but had given her a new life filled with love, purpose, and the promise of happiness. They returned to Whispering Pines Ranch a week later, arriving as the golden light of late afternoon bathed the valley in warmth. As Preston lifted Rose from the wagon to carry her across the threshold of the cabin, now their home, he paused, looking into her eyes. When I first brought you here, he said quietly, I told you that you were free with me. I meant it then, and I mean it now. You'll never be anything but my equal, my partner in everything." Rose touched his face tenderly. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I love you." He carried her into the cabin, both of them laughing as he nearly stumbled over the threshold, then set her gently on her feet in the main room, which Rose had already begun to transform into a true home during her initial stay. "Welcome home, Mrs. York," Preston said, his voice husky with emotion. "It's good to be home," Rose replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. The months that followed brought both challenges and joys. They traveled to Sacramento for the trial, where Rose faced her father's killers with dignity and strength, her testimony helping to secure convictions that sent Blackwell, Montgomery, and their conspirators to prison for life. The court awarded Rose ownership of her father's farm, which she and Preston decided to sell, using the proceeds to expand Whispering Pines Ranch and establish a fund to assist other families who had been victimized by the railroad's practices. By the following spring, Rose had fully transformed their cabin into a comfortable home, adding feminine touches that complemented Preston's more utilitarian furnishings. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Rose introducing vegetable gardens and a small orchard that diversified their self-sufficiency. On a warm evening in May 1876, exactly 1 year after Rose had lost her father and nearly lost her freedom, she and Preston sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of pink and gold. "I have news," Rose said, taking Preston's hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, in the winter." Preston's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Rose, that's wonderful." He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. "I never thought I'd have this again," he confessed. "A family, a future, nor did I," Rose admitted. "That day at the auction, when everything was being taken from me, including my freedom, I thought my life was over. But it was just beginning." Preston kissed her, pouring all his love and gratitude into the gesture. When they parted, he kept his forehead against hers. "You know, when I tore up that contract and told you that you were free with me, I had no idea where that moment would lead us." "To exactly where we're meant to be," Rose said simply. That December, their son was born a healthy, robust boy they named Edgar Matthew York, honoring both the father and brother they had lost but whose memories they had vindicated. As Rose nursed their child before the fire on a snowy evening, Preston watching them with undisguised adoration, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From the depths of despair to the heights of happiness, from a woman sold as property to a beloved wife and mother, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, noting her contemplative expression. Rose smiled, looking down at their son's peaceful face. "I was thinking that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the best ones if we're brave enough to keep going, to trust in the possibility of something better." Preston reached out to caress their son's downy head. "And sometimes," he added softly, "the best things come to us when we least expect them, wrapped in the most unlikely packages." "Like a cowboy at an auction paying for a woman's freedom," Rose said with a tender smile. "Best purchase I ever made," Preston replied. Leaning forward to kiss her gently. In the years that followed, the York family expanded with the addition of a daughter, Sarah Rose, born 2 years after her brother. Whispering Pines Ranch grew into one of the most prosperous in the county, known for its quality cattle and the warm hospitality of its owners. Preston and Rose became respected figures in the community, their story of courage against corruption inspiring others to stand against injustice, wherever they found it. They established a scholarship fund for children who had lost parents, ensuring that others would have opportunities that might otherwise have been denied them. And each year, On the anniversary of the day, Preston had torn up the labor contract and told Rose she was free with him. They celebrated what they called their true beginning, the moment when two wounded souls recognized in each other the possibility of healing, of home, of a love that would withstand any challenge. For Rose York, who had once been sold along with her family's chattels, freedom had come not just from the tearing of a contract, but from the love of a man who saw her true worth beyond any price that could be paid at auction. And in that freedom, she had found everything she had ever hoped for and more than she had ever dreamed possible.